morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Kurt. Thank you so much for joining us today on my channel. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great today. Thank you.
Oh, good. Awesome. Yeah, happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday to you.
I hope it's a good first day off, day of rest-ish. I mean,
It
Saturdays,
is.
you try to get things done. I think Saturday and Sunday should be switched so we can have our crash on Sunday and really rest. Otherwise, we're too tempted to be busy.
That's true. That's true.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And
Sure.
if you're ready, we'll just kind of start. I know that you were raised Catholic, but not in the SSPX. So I was wondering if you could kind of tell us a little bit about, your exposure to Catholicism growing up and what that was like.
Sure. I grew up outside of Chicago, one of three children, two Catholic parents. We were culturally Catholic. We went to church on Sunday, went to catechism classes during the week, not parochial school. My dad went to parochial school. My mother went to public school. Her mother was Catholic. Her father was a Calvinist. And my father's family were from Italy, northern Italy, so they're Italian. So they were Catholic. And so my dad was really more of, although my mother always went to church, my dad was really more of the mover to make sure that we knew things and went to church. But we didn't really do like home devotions regularly. We prayed before and after meals on Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving kind of thing, or maybe some other special like First Communions and things like that, confirmations. So we did that. I was very much gifted with music when I was young. Was discovered when I was 4 years old.
Wow.
And so my grandfather on my mother's side, who was very musical, actually both my mom's parents were very musical, got me going on lessons, and I always wanted to play the organ because I could come home from church on Sunday and play from ear everything that I heard.
Whoa. That's pretty cool.
Whether it was because I was born before the council, but very young when things started to change, but still enough that I could remember. My dad would always, he knew I liked music, so he took me to high mass, and so I could come home and play the Kyrie and things like that, and the Adoro Te Devote and psalm tones and things like that.
Oh, cool.
But like later on, I realized that the propers they sang were Rossini propers. So I went back to the church later, and there was a whole cabinet full of them that they were getting rid of.
Wow.
So I still have one. But anyway, it's pretty cool. So that was my upbringing. So but in the 70s, I was in high school, junior high and high school in the 70s, and was kind of a, what do I want to say, tumultuous time, in the church and in society. And we had organists in the area that he was interested in me developing my talent, and had asked my parents if he could take me overnight or for a weekend. And that was one of the biggest mistakes ever in my life, as he for 3 days brutally raped me.
Oh man.
At 15 years old. And of course I was traumatized. I literally thought I was going to die.
Oh man.
Because we didn't talk about sex when my parents, we didn't talk about that in our house, it wasn't what people did back then,
Right.
And so my life from that point was not very good. I struggled in school. I got through. I did get a scholarship to go to music school. I pursued that, but basically was by that time in my life an agnostic.
Oh. Well, I was going to ask, how did that experience affect your involvement at church and the practice of your faith? Because I was, living in Chicago at the time, going to school and playing for a couple of churches, but that was all just because of the music. There was really no concrete,
belief as such at that time.
Right.
Then I started seeing, the behavior of other priests and different people, workers in the church, and I was like, this is just a mess. And then
Yeah.
I met this wonderful Benedictine from Atchison, Kansas, from the Abbey,
Mhm.
and he was the head of the Institute on Religious Life at the time. He deceased in 2008. I
Mm.
ran into him. I'm trying to think how I ran into him. I think I was asked to play for something, and he was there. We started talking, and we met a few times, and he got me back to practicing my faith. I went to confession,
Yeah.
which I had not done in years.
Mm.
Realized that God was real and that these things were not God's fault.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, I mean, and if your family's faith tradition was more just kind of cultural, like you described, not
Right.
so deeply rooted in you. I mean, did you tell anybody else about what happened to
Not
you afterward?
well. I told the parish I was the organist at in high school. One, I played for two parishes. My home
Mhm.
parish, uh, and then another parish later time in the morning. And there was an older nun that directed the choir, and I told her, and she just said, "We'll stay away from those kinds of people."
Oh, oh, yeah,
And
that really
this,
helps. What happened?
and I told the psychologist at our high school, in my high school, public high school, and
Yeah.
she said the same thing and asked me, she said, well, maybe you're gay, and maybe you wanted that, and it
Like
was
you
just like,
wouldn't
that's
know if you
true.
did or not.
Yeah, like I said, but I
Wow.
didn't know about that. She says, well, then just think the next time before you go around those kind of people.
Well,
So
you
that
had no warning that
I
he
got,
was like
and
that, though.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't tell my parents, because I knew if I told my parents, my father would have killed the person and gone to prison,
Oh,
probably. So
oh,
I didn't
wow.
want my dad to go to prison,
Oh, no.
so
Cow.
yeah, so I kept this inside for many years. When I was later on in college, was
Ah.
actually, yeah, later on in college, somebody, a friend of mine who was going to school said, don't you remember the mass was in Latin and everything and all that? And they go, yeah, I know that. And I said, I remember it, vaguely from when I was a kid and some of the music.
Yeah.
And of course, we studied in music school, we studied chant and all of that. And we had a Benedictine Abbey down the road from my house. So I knew how to do chant and everything way back then,
Yeah.
when nobody was doing it.
Okay.
And so um, they took me to an SSPX mass
Hmm.
because no one else was offering it.
Okay.
There was one priest in Chicago that was still doing it, but he was in a bad neighborhood.
Oh.
So people were kind of afraid, he'd been pastor since the 50s in some way, how it never changed or whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah.
a lot of stuff came out about him later that was not good. The whole thing was not of good faith, what he was
Oh.
doing. Yeah. It was a way of him getting access to kids.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow.
And yeah, so
Wow.
so I went to SSPX, and I met the priest there, and he said, oh, you probably have a vocation, you should come to our seminary.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I had no plans after college, and so their seminary was in Connecticut at the time, so I went for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
um it was one of the worst experiences of my life.
Oh no. Like you needed another one.
Like I needed another one. And it was
Wow.
like they had a split that year where the Sedevacantists split off.
Oh yeah. The
One of
nine.
the seminarians put the moves on me,
Mm.
and I found out there was like 6 of them there that were homosexuals.
Wow. And there weren't even that many, right? I mean, how many guys
Yeah,
were
back then it was 35, maybe
there?
25, 35. I don't remember.
Wow.
It's a part of my life that I blocked a lot of it out in my
Yeah.
mind.
Right.
And I actually ended up in the hospital with a stomach ulcer,
Um,
an ulcerative colitis.
wow. As a
And
result
so,
of the stress from all that.
yes, of all the stress
Oh,
from it. And so
wow.
I got out of there. But then I was like, my whole thing is I always wanted to think the best of people. like, or of a group. Like, maybe not everybody's like that.
Yeah.
And then I met a guy who was teaching at their school in St. Mary's. I went back to the Chicago area and got a job, and got a job actually not even in music, and then did it for a year, and then went back to church music, playing in a parish. I was just in a parish, and then at that time they had brought the Traditionalism in 1984. They brought the traditional mass, the motu proprio of John Paul II. I think it was.
Right. Ecclesia Dei, like
I think it was 82, but in 84, the Archdiocese of Chicago, which I was working in, decided to have like 4 or 5 locations for it on Saturdays, once a month in each location, And so an older priest that I knew who had actually directed the music for the Archdiocese many years was doing one of them, and I had met him, and he says, "Kurt, you're the only one I know that knows the chant. Can you please help us with this?" So I did that, and I did that for 4 years while I was working in the parish. The parish I worked in was overall pretty good for the first 2 years. Cardinal Bernardine was the archbishop at the time. Some people didn't like that the priests there were not progressive enough, so he removed both of them and put in 2 very, very avant-garde priests who were both homosexuals.
Oh no! Wow.
So
were they pretty open about it, or
pretty open? Yeah, they were pretty open about it. Yeah, and basically, one of them was kind of harassing me. They never made not made advances towards me or anything, nothing like that. But they were saying, you're just in denial. You're really like that, and and that kind of stuff, all that nonsense. You were probably born that way, and people are born that way, and but they would deny like chief tenets, like the Semper Virgo and things like that, and that kind of stuff. A lot of social justice stuff. But I had a friend. I had met a guy who was teaching at the society school in St. Mary's, Kansas, and let's see, it was my 4th year at the parish in Illinois, and he says, "Oh, they got a new priest, and he wants to have a music program and pay a chapel organist." And so I went out there and met with him, and thought he was kind of different, but I thought, you know what, I need another job because this other one's not working out. So I went there for a couple of years. It was not a good experience. I actually had a better experience when I was working back at the other parish,
Wow, you thought you were moving up in the world, and it didn't work
and
out.
I thought thinking like, but they have the traditional mass, so there still has to be something good about it. And people were like became like that was the church, but I've never thought that way, really. I never thought that like they were the church and you could only go there, and I was never like,
like hardcore SSPX.
It was hardcore, and the priest was a tyrant. And they had I think there were 4 priests at the time, and one was a tyrant, the other one was very sketchy. One of the other ones was very sketchy. And that's when one of my students came to me and said that one of the priests had been raping him.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And I'm like, I can't escape this stuff. It's like, I cannot escape it.
Yeah.
And they would, here we go. They would say like, well, no, that's really an oversortal problem.
Oh. Yeah. Right.
Okay. They would say, well, that's an oversortal problem. They wouldn't to any kind of, well, I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, it is a problem in the Novus Ordo, which I don't even really use that term anymore. But 69 missile, so, but it's like, but then I just like tried to focus on the positive. That student ended up committing suicide 10 years later.
Oh gosh. Well,
And
you tried to talk to the priest about it, right?
well, so I went to the priest, and of course he got mad at me, and then he rescinded my contract for the next year
Oh,
because I became the problem.
oh, wow. So you couldn't really do anything for this kid then. I mean, he's
No,
just,
no. And the thing is, I had met a girl there, another teacher, and we ended up getting married,
Mhm.
which turned out to be a total disaster later on, 9 kids later. Well, I didn't even know that the priest had to have jurisdiction. I wasn't a canon lawyer. I didn't know you had to have jurisdiction for
Yeah,
marriages. And so there was no sanctifying grace, there was no sacramental grace.
yeah, right.
And we had all, I was the one actually, I was not a tratty junkie by any means,
Uh-huh.
but it ended up that she was the one that was more liberal than I was.
Wow. Interesting.
And yeah, and it was the only reason the kids had any kind of formation was from me
Wow.
for the most part.
Did you guys homeschool or?
We homeschooled, and she would do, the bare minimum,
Oh, okay,
the
but
very
you did
bare,
religion.
right. So as
Okay.
far as like devotions and learning the faith, that all came down to me while I was working, full-time jobs and things
Yeah.
like that. And so that wasn't always practical. I did what I could when I could, of course.
Yeah.
And let's just say I owned up to my side of it.
Yeah.
But it was, she was very abusive to me and
Yeah.
non-communicative. Um, so I like it. Just I don't know, but I'm not one to just walk out either. I don't like just quit on
Yeah.
things. That's just not who I am. That's not the way I was raised.
Yeah. Well, you said
And
your parents were married for a really long time, and
they were married for 63 years.
oh wow, that's
And my
awesome.
mother, ended up with Alzheimer's the last 6 years of her life, and my father took care of her at home until she died.
Oh wow,
And
that's
he will
awesome.
be 90 years old next month.
Oh, that's
So
great.
yeah,
Wow.
we have longevity on both sides of my family. But it's like so. But it put enmity between me and my parents.
Yeah.
And it's just was the whole thing was. So then in the diocese, I was working at a parish in our diocese at that time,
Hmm.
and the bishop brought in this group called the Institute of Christ the King.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, no. So now this is more mainstream. We don't need the SSPX.
Okay, I was going to ask, what was your grasp of that, like the society's position in relation to the church? I mean, you were going,
Well,
but you
well,
weren't
the
really.
thing is, the consecrations took place in '88 when I went to St. Mary's. It had just taken place, and I was like, I didn't understand all that because again, I didn't understand canon law. I
Yeah.
didn't know that they needed to pay, but it was later on, many years later, that I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They were given all kinds of chances, and every time they spit in the Pope's face.
Yeah. Right.
He spit in Lefebvre Pope spit in Paul VI's face with the '74 Declaration, which I never even read until just a few years ago.
Oh my gosh, was that kind of kept quiet in the
Oh
society? Like,
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
oh my god.
Because it's incriminating. Just it was a total, on-stage attack of the magisterium.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it was
And
very
and
defiant.
he used like terms like the experiment of tradition,
Yeah. Right.
which is still bothering me to this day. That one.
Yeah, it should, because tradition isn't supposed to be an experiment.
And it's like I
Have
read
continuity.
I read Luther's 95 Theses, and it wasn't as nasty as this.
Hmm. Okay, because I wondered if the society would be like waving it like a flag, like, "Hey, look at what he did," or if they would sort of keep it quiet lest people be
Well,
scared.
that part they would keep quiet, but the fact that he continued to operate, you know, in defiance, they would wave the flag about.
Mm, okay.
The defiance was like more important than the fundamentals of the faith.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. Otherwise, they wouldn't be where they are today.
Right.
Gosh.
And then as over time, I noticed it became more about money and whether they liked you or not.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So they look for
So,
certain types.
and they never really liked
Towards
me
them.
because I never had a lot of money. I mean, I supported my family and all that, but we were never rich.
Yeah.
And I certainly wasn't going to give it to them anyway. Okay. And then the other thing is that, like, being a musician and wanting perfection and all that,
Mm.
I did have done better music in the 69 Missile than I ever was able to do in the traditional Mass,
Huh. That's
as far as
interesting.
quality and quantity.
Cool. Wow.
Because for them, it was just like, get it over with, and, low Mass, or just very simple misa cantata,
Yeah.
only chant masses, very limited repertory, and not of good quality.
Oh,
And I'm like,
why? Because
I'm
then
like,
people might come just because
how are
of
I
the
said,
music
I
and how
was like,
terrible
well,
it
how
is.
are we? Well, I was like, how are we fighting anything?
Hmm.
How are we
Yeah.
trying? And so the Mass became, like,
Wow.
like, I don't know what to say, phrases. It was like, run through the Mass as quick as possible until you get to the sermon, so you could have your hour for promoting their propaganda.
Whoa. Were they really that long?
Oh yeah, it was ridiculous.
Wow.
But then
Man.
we can only have one or two verses of the final hymn because, that's, who cares about
No.
that?
Oh, no. Oh,
There's actual theology involved there, so we can't do that.
wow. Yeah. Well,
Or
no,
sing all
I
the
know. I mean,
verses of a processional hymn or a communion hymn or what have you.
wow. So it's not really about like glorious liturgy and giving it our best to God. It's like their agenda. Let's get in, let's get out. They don't pay their musicians a lot of the time. They
Yeah,
don't.
and it was everything but them was Protestant.
Hmm. Wow.
But they
Yeah.
never really taught you what a Protestant was.
Oh, were they too busy talking about modernists?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But they
Everybody.
were just. But I mean, it's just. I mean, the way that they treated, like, non-Catholics was really bad.
Okay.
It started really getting to me, even though I will admit that I participated in some of that, but I was like, you know what, this is not really good.
Mm-hmm.
It's because what it came down to with them, it was a lack of charity and a lack of humility.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, the elitist mentality of we've got the corner on the market and these people don't.
Let's see here.
Right. Okay. I was curious about your time, especially teaching in St. Mary's, if there were ever other children or young
Having
people
trouble connecting
you knew
this.
of that were being abused by the society or any other traditionalist priests. Like, did other
Is it
people
any
come
better?
to you at other times and kind of like, you know, share what was going on? Because it seems like you're sort of a magnet for that stuff.
Hmm.
I wonder if you're um, not hearing me. Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties.
Okay, there we go.
All right. Can
There
you
we
hear me,
go.
Kurt? Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
Oh,
Now I
good.
can,
No.
yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh,
Because I asked
yes.
you questions, but you were quiet. That's okay. I
So
just asked you
when I,
about like if oh yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I don't want
but
to interrupt you.
but then it's just the whole narrative, and to this day, the whole narrative, it started becoming like a cult.
Hmm.
and and not only with that, and not only with SSPX, but all the other groups too.
Okay. Like how many can you just list real quick for us? Like how many different traditionalist groups and communities you've been involved with in the past? I mean, you named quite a few to me the
Okay,
other day.
yeah, and so the bishop of our diocese, I was playing in a parish, and he appointed our church to be a site for the traditional mass. So I ended up doing the music for it. He brought in this group called the Institute of Christ the King,
Okay. Right.
and
Okay.
I'm
So
like,
this
well,
is where they come in.
they're approved, and I'm like, this is gonna, and I can get away from the SSPX and all the political stuff,
Okay.
but not really. But
Okay.
not really. And so, like, the priest that they sent was an alcoholic. Um, he was a total minimalist. It was just about them and their organization. Uh, I had a very bad experience. One of their priests who was coming down had actually had me come to another church with him up in the state of Wisconsin, and he removed items that were not, he did not have permission, but he told me he had permission to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a whole big police thing and all of that. And it was all because there was a group of us. It came out that their American Spirit was raping children, boys, young boys.
Oh, wow.
And we were fighting it. And so they were going after any of the parents they could to shut us up.
Wow. Oh, so that's why you were able to.
That's why I was, yeah, uh-huh. Well,
Oh, so that was set up on purpose just to
right,
take you out. Oh, wow.
the priest ended up going to jail. I did not, although I still have a mark on me because of it. Because in Wisconsin, even if you didn't know the person did it and you were with him, you're still somehow guilty to a certain extent. Okay,
Oh,
it's just the way the law works there. There's several states are like that.
wow.
It's not
Okay.
fair, but that's just the way it works, you
Right.
know.
Okay.
But but anyway, finally there was justice, and the superior was indicted on 11 counts of the 30, cases.
30
Um,
cases?
yeah,
30
and
cases?
all he got was 18 months
Wow.
because they had a connection with the judge. The institute did.
Wow, that's handy.
Right. Oh, also, by the way, the priest back in my hometown that was doing the main mass, he
Yeah.
also broke the seal of confession to the police against me.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
Oh. Yeah,
So
you don't hear about that very much.
you know what? The Trats had no problem with it because it was about getting Kurt, so it was okay.
Oh, wow. So this is all in police reports.
It's all in there.
Oh,
It's all
yeah.
in there.
Okay. Concrete
And
evidence.
and
Great.
the detective in the case was a homosexual. So he was on the institute side, and yeah, so he he wanted to get the other priests off softly, and get me,
Wow.
because the whole idea of those people is to destabilize the family so you can get to the kids, and eventually makes the kids become vulnerable.
Oh, no.
And
Oh,
I've studied all of this ever since then, and this is how, and it's just like, yeah, we live in a very wicked world. And so
yeah. You
yeah,
wish
and
it wasn't
matter of
that
fact,
bad, but
he
you got to
called
admit that it is.
the detective called a friend of mine in California, and to try to get him to say that I was a bad guy and all. He said, first of all, I know Kurt would not have done that if he knew.
Yeah.
And the cop said to him, says, "You're not telling me what I need to hear." He said,
When?
"I'm telling you the I'm telling you the truth." And he said, "You got to understand that we have to get him, even though he's not guilty. We have to get him." This
Oh,
friend
yeah.
of mine will go. This friend of mine has gone public. He'll tell this to anybody.
Wow.
He'll tell them. He said, "I'm telling you the truth. This is what this." And then he said, "Oh," he said, "you're near San Francisco." He said, "I just love San Francisco." He said, "Don't you think it's wonderful?"
What?
And I like to visit San Francisco because all my friends are there and everything. And then basically admitted that he was gay and all this, and
Oh, no.
just a real creep. He was just trying to destroy me and my family. Is all he's trying to do.
Man.
But
God.
see, the trads just piled on me, because then when it came down to, and this is the point, that it comes down to, especially since all of the sex abuse scandal in SSPX that's come out,
Mm-hmm.
is that stealing is worse than raping kids. So Kurt is the bad guy, not our priests and our people and laymen and teachers that are doing these horrible things to kids.
Oh, yeah. Someone gets to
So,
decide that that's the hierarchy of things, that
right,
stealing from a church building is a worse crime than defiling an innocent temple of the Holy
right,
Spirit.
right. And one of their
Okay.
promoters, SSPX, got online and basically said that, I think he said that liturgical abuse is worse than ever raping a child. Something to that. I'd have to go back and listen to it, but it was just outrageous. It was absolutely outrageous.
But that's not a lone voice. I mean, that's a common response that you've run into among trads.
It's very common. Obviously not everyone, but it's
Yeah.
very common because they will do anything to protect the TLM. That has become an idol for them.
Wow. Yeah. No, I've seen that. Yeah, I believe it. It's just crazy to what lengths they'll go and what they're willing to believe and excuse in order to not have that threatened.
Yeah. And I ended up eventually, after all that happened, the pastor of the parish where I was working, where the bishop had appointed for that mass to be there, the Institute Mass, he kicked them out of the parish and said they had to find another parish. He said, "You're not going to attack my organist, my music director, because you people are creeps."
Wow.
And he was a 69, priest, a Vatican II priest, very good man, good man, And he was like, "No, Kurt, I'm not going to fire you." He said, "Over this." He said, "Because I know who the culprit is, and it's not you. You got sucked into this thing." So I stayed there I think it was another 2-3 years, I think. And then I went on to another parish back in the Archdiocese of Chicago. And then my home parish in town came open, and where my grandparents were married and my parents were married and aunts and uncles, and I was baptized and everything. And they had gotten a new pastor there, and he had restored the church inside. And he said, "Kurt, I want you to come here and be the music director." And he said, "I'm going to start the TLM, but I'm not putting up with any garbage."
Okay.
He said, "The people come in here and start with their narrative and all their schismatic garbage." He said, they're going to be out on their ear.
Yeah.
So I spent 7 probably of some of the happiest years of my life in that parish.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, there was happiness in the 2 before also, but I think I spent the most happy years of my life in that parish for 7 years.
Wow. So where was your family at in this? Like, were they going to church with you?
They would go, but she would still take them to SSPX.
Okay.
In Chicago.
Okay. So your kids grew up with exposure to more
both.
than just. Oh, okay. All right.
To both. And a few of the kids, I had them in the parish school for a couple of years, so they would go to the school mass, but she of course was against that because it was the Novus Ordo, and it might not be valid, and
okay.
And it was while I was there that I found out that my marriage wasn't valid.
Oh.
And the pastor was like really, really kind and everything, and he was like,
yeah.
He said, "Kurt," he said, "I can fix this in like 5 minutes.
Wow.
We can do a ratio, something." There was some Latin term for it.
Yes.
And you just, you both come in, you sign this form, he signs it and sends it in, and it's done. Don't even have to repeat the vows.
Wow.
Okay. She refused to do it.
Oh.
Because SSPX has supply jurisdiction.
Yeah. Right.
So it was during that time that I started doing some more research and so forth. And unfortunately, that job ended because he was transferred. We got a new bishop he's not all that great. And he put in a new priest who's actually an abuser, has credible allegations against him.
Wow.
And he did not like my stance against abusers and LGBT. So I lasted 2 years with him, and he got rid of me.
Wow. Okay.
I still have the letter he gave me where he said, "I'm eliminating your position," and then the next day he hired someone else.
Wow.
Yeah. So and I hang on to that letter. I should have bought that out and actually showed that on the camera. But anyway, yeah. I can make a copy of it for you sometime. You can put it up. But anyway, he's the kids in the school called him Father Creeper. That was his nickname. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's a really creepy guy. So
this was one question I asked, I think, when somehow you couldn't hear me for a minute. I was asking if, like, that first kid that came to you at St. Mary's, that was Michael Gonzalez, right?
Bryce, it was.
Yeah, okay. And then and he was coming out against Father Ramon Anglès, saying he was
Correct.
the raper. Okay, and because that was even a suicide note and stuff. So you can.
But he had, at this point, he has many more allegations against him. So
I've heard that. So, but then were there other kids? Because it seems like you're a magnet for this stuff. Like people would maybe just sort of feel that you were someone they could talk to about it.
Because they knew I was understanding, and they didn't know that I myself was a victim. But of course, I was a magnet too, and I could tell. I could just look at somebody to this day and tell that they were abused.
Oh my gosh! Wow. So you had other people.
Somebody a year ago tell me that they were abused. I knew it before they even told me.
Oh, weird.
I just knew.
Wow. That's
so
crazy.
Like when it's like when I didn't know absolutely for sure, but I was pretty sure, and then they start telling me, I'm like, yeah. Wow. Because it doesn't go away. Right. And I did not get help until 2006.
Wow.
It's when I went, I was talking to the pastor that hired me at that time, and he himself was also a victim when he was young.
Oh.
And it's probably one of the best priests I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
And we still are in contact with each other. He was relegated to the northern parts of the diocese because he had turned in several abusers himself, and but
it doesn't make you very popular.
Yeah, it was. No, it doesn't make you very popular. And here's another thing that Trads has said to me, about LGBT or abuse, sexual abuse, any of that. They'll say, your problem is, Kurt, you need to just shut up because it really doesn't matter. Just shut up. Don't talk about it.
Wow, what a thing for them to say. And they're supposed to be so like hardcore and doing everything right.
They are not. I'll repeat it 100 times. They are not.
Wow.
It's all a smoke screen. It is all a smoke screen.
Wow. That's just weird. Like you're describing to me the other day when we talked how like even their verbiage changed, like in seminary when they realized you weren't going for the homo thing, and they started like kind of ridiculing you and calling you a homophobe.
Oh, they did.
Racist, all this stuff. It was like, what?
Yeah, I forget
I'm
the
like,
term,
what? That's
whatever
like weird.
the terms were back then.
That's what they say the liberals talk like, and then they're using it on you. Like now you're the enemy, and they get to pick on you in the same terms. It's just so weird to me.
No, because for them, it's about the organization and the TLM as a cover.
Okay. Well, that's a good cover.
That's what I've come down to the conclusion just from my experience. And of course, people will say, well, Kurt, you cannot judge something by your own experience. Well, I think I can, actually.
Yeah.
So that's what I get. That's the usual to this very day.
In all these different communities, all these different priests and people, it's like you have a very particular position and experience to offer. It's one person, but it brought you into contact with all of this stuff. I mean, it's just crazy what you had to experience.
And then the true colors of the people of their quote unquote faithful, the true colors came out. It's like, you need to just shut up. That's not what this is about.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Don't threaten the status quo because we like it this way. And as long as we're not in the back getting raped, it's okay.
And I finally came to the conclusion is that their idea of being a Catholic man is smoking big cigars, drinking to excess, making a lot of money, and treating your wife like crap.
Oh. Well, yeah, I've heard a lot of that. Like women, they're not supposed to be educated like men. They just stay, in the kitchen, pregnant. Like that's them doing their job, but they don't get on a par with men. They're supposed to be sub all this. Yeah, that's very common in my experience too.
Wow. And so it was, anyway. So in 2000, so I lost that job in 2015, and I was like, we had a Missouri Synod Lutheran church a couple blocks from my house. Their organist was dying of cancer, and one of my dad's best friends is a member there. Mm-hmm. And he said, Kurt, we need an organist, and you just lost your job, Oh, and so I went over and talked to them. I ended up being their organist for 2 years. Oh. And boy, did I get criticized for that.
Oh my goodness. So
Oh,
the
I got close
society
there.
won't pay you to work in music for them, but they'll criticize you for trying to get paid somewhere else and
Well,
support your
yeah, I wasn't going to go back. And at that point, that's my well, she's my ex now. We're first divorce, and that's the other part of the story. Another
family.
part of the story. But
Yeah.
she ended up taking the kids basically back to SSPX.
Okay.
And
Huh.
a and we had a Byzantine church in town too, which I never really cared for. She would take them there sometimes too. They have their own set of the same kind of problems there too.
Oh boy.
Oh yeah, because it was connected with the monastery in town, and they just last summer just had a huge sex abuse with their boys' academy, and
Oh
it
no.
goes back like 50 years, 60 years, or whatever. And yeah, it's pretty bad. And I was there. I was actually their organist for Sunday Vespers for 27 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and because they still sing chant there
Okay.
at that abbey, and I enjoyed that very much. My first organ teacher was the organist. They're a monk organist, so I have this. I love Benedictine monasticism.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So, and now I'm living amongst it again in a different town, so it's wonderful.
Oh, that's cool.
In a different town and state, but um, so and I'm the organist at their parish, and I love it.
Oh, good.
So
Good. That
yeah,
haven finally.
but it so yeah, so anyway, before yeah, so they started going back to SSPX. Well, then
Hmm.
I'm playing in a Lutheran church, and those were 2 very happy years too. They treated me very very well there.
Good.
They
Yeah.
were very conservative. Very liturgical. A lot. I learned more about Scripture those 2 years that I never had ever learned in the Catholic Church.
Oh wow. That's sad. That is so sad.
I know it's sad, but it was a good thing. I mean, it was a good
That's
thing
good for
for me. It
you.
was
No, I'm glad.
positive.
But it's just like, oh man, we do need more of that. I mean, the
And
Protestants,
of
you got to
course,
get into them for what they do well.
I know, and it's like and frankly, liturgically, they were better too. But that's a whole nother, you
Oh
know,
no. Oh,
and they were very much, against abortion, the LGBT thing, just very, women's ordination.
yeah.
Um, yeah, the Missouri Synod is very good in many ways, and so yeah, I'm not hateful like the trads are about other people like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
you know and we need to talk to other people, and it's good to have a relationship with
Right.
our
Yeah.
other
It's not a
brethren.
sin to play the organ for a Protestant
No,
service.
it's not. No, it's not.
No, it's like, yeah, but that is one thing we did need. We did need that ecumenism encouragement to, like, go, extend yourself to people. Don't just hang back and be like, oh, you're gonna contaminate me if I get too
Yeah,
close. It's like,
I
that's not
mean,
gonna bring anybody.
at the time of the or the Lutheran Reformation, the term Protestant really wasn't even a term. They don't even really. I would say Missouri Synod doesn't even. Don't even go by that term.
Yeah.
They just say their polity is Lutheran. Period. You
Okay.
know, it would
Interesting.
just say, where that term would be more, as I found out. Again, I started like just researching and studying more. That would be more of like Calvin and Zwingli and the Anabaptists, and that would be
Okay.
more, and evangelicalism today, Protestant, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing. So anyway, so I got some, pretty good education. Let's just say that, and
Cool.
I actually grew in my faith because I was learning the scriptures. Because I didn't learn the scriptures in tradism, as I call it.
Yeah, I've heard that multiple times.
You never got it, hardly got it from the pulpit. Here you had an epistle and gospel every Sunday. No, they
Mhm.
just ramble on about their organization and about them and how you have to follow them and all this kind of thing, or some private revelation, or some Jansenistic nonsense about sin.
Okay. Hmm.
And it's like, how is it just scaring people? And God is just a monster hanging around every corner ready to damn somebody.
Wow. Wow.
There's no forgiveness, there's no assurance, there's no anything except for damnation.
Wow. And there's nowhere to go, nowhere else
And
to
there's
go according to
there's
them.
no
So it's
yeah,
like,
and
if
there and
you
there's
despair,
and there's nowhere
you're
else to
just toast.
go.
You might as well just,
Yeah,
become an atheist, because
yeah, exactly. And it's just like I
wow.
was. my anxiety was already bad enough for what happened to me.
Yeah. Well,
And it
that's
just,
one thing I
all
haven't
this stuff
asked you
triggered.
yet was like I mean, were you ever tempted to suicide? And especially like before you finally started kind of on your healing journey, you're
on
just sort of dealing.
numerous times.
God.
Obviously, I never followed through with it. I never even came close to following through with it. But the temptation still occasionally raises its ugly head, but it goes away right away. No, because I finally got a good therapist, a Christian therapist, back in 2006.
Okay.
For 7, 8 years, I went to him, and my ex, she blamed it all on me, what happened, because I had never told her and her family, and I never got any support. He told her that she needed to come at least once a month with me so we could try to work out other stuff, and never would go. I think out of 7 or 8 years she came twice, maybe 3 times.
Wow. That's so funny because
To
usually
see,
it's the woman that's like, can we go to counseling? And the guy's like, no.
but
Unless they're
no, it was
staring
basically
divorce in the face. Wow.
no, it was basically why she was like, why do I need to go? She said, I don't do anything wrong. You're the one that does everything wrong. You're the one with the problems.
Oh, wow. So you finally decided to fess up to tell your wife about what happened
Yeah,
to you and to
yeah,
confide to her, and she just stomped on you.
yeah, and she finally, and of course she finally had bought the whole SSPX line, hook, line, and sinker. If you don't have money, you're nothing. You're a loser. You're not one of the chosen.
Wow.
They are worse than Calvinists, and I do not like Calvinism.
Wow. That's weird because I had a guy on my show last night and he was talking about being Calvinist at one point and then he ended up in the Catholic Church and he
Sure,
was comparing Calvinism to traditionalism and how they're very intellectual. Like it's kind of a form of Protestantism that really appeals to the intellect. Because they're so well read, or they try to base everything off of writings and things and make it sound all reasonable, and then they're very elitist. Like if you know about Calvinism and you're one of the chosen, then God, you're in God's favor even though you're still dirt, but it's like you're privileged and you're not going to go to hell because of what and so you're not
it's
supposed to, but you get kind of
it
arrogant.
is
It's like,
it is so similar to Tradism. It's really frightening. It's very
oh,
frightening. And I finally put all these pieces together over the years. And I'm like, because my brother's a Calvinist, and
oh,
incorrigible one, and he's a good man and everything. He's a retired police officer, but it's a very dark kind of thing, and so we get along okay, but you know, um, it was, yeah, it's, but it's over time. It's just like, and then as I started studying scripture, and then I'm very much into Lectio Divina now and Liturgy of the Hours, because I'm sorry, the Old Breviary doesn't give you a lot of access, as a layman, to the office.
it's
Okay,
really
because it was
long.
designed for priests and monks, and that's
Yeah.
okay. I mean that's what they had. But I realize now that politics, change in the office, which by the way was started under Saint Pius X,
Ah, that's a good thing to know.
by the reorienting the psalm, the psalms throughout the hours, and of
Okay.
course some of the trads are attacking him now for doing that. You know,
Oh yeah. Where will it
they're
stop? I mean, he can't be perfect forever.
they just keep going further and further back and attacking further and further back. Attacking Pius the Ninth now and Leo the 13th and this kind of thing and various things. And I'm just like, no, what they did, the liturgy of the hours, that reform brought the office to the average layman.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually the prayer of the whole church now, not just clerics.
It,
And it's very bonding. I mean, I've prayed that together for years with my family and other
let's
friends
see
and
here.
priests and religious. It's like it's such an awesome experience
Okay,
to be able to
so
do
it
that.
brought it to the average layman.
Right.
It's a prayer, not just right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the only way the lay people could do it is if they had like an English translation, a vernacular translation, let's say, Little Office of the Blessed Virgin. Okay,
But didn't
but
you say
that's
that was kind of poo-pooed in traditional circles? Like, oh, you don't pray the liturgy of the hours. That's just for the clerics. Almost like it was a
that's
bad
right.
thing if
That's
you
right.
wanted to.
That's right. Or if you really feel a calling to do that, then you need to just pick one of the hours from the old breviary and just do that.
That's so
Like
arbitrary.
Sunday
It's so
Compline,
weird.
like
Like, what do
Sunday
they back that up
Compline, or maybe Sunday Vesper or something. I'm like, yeah, but then we're missing all these beautiful lessons from the church fathers,
with? Yeah.
you know,
Right.
at the office of readings and
Yeah.
all of this, and the 4 week cycle makes more sense for the average person,
Yeah. Right.
and we're going to be coming out with a much better translation here, and the hymns translated here in the next couple of years, and
Oh,
so
awesome.
some of that's already available, and I'm making use of it already. But um, so anyway, it's just like, well, anyway. So what happened was when I lost my job and I was working at the Lutheran Church, and she was going back to SSPX. They finally told her to just leave me because I was a hopeless cause.
Okay.
Take the kids, leave me. And then it was all deceptive. They were like, well, you go such and such. So I'm just thinking like only of the kids, not even of her. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of the kids. And we already had a situation in 2008 where she was already letting my oldest daughter, when she was 16, go out with older men.
Hmm. Like
And this
significantly
one night,
older.
21,
Okay. Right.
yeah,
But yeah,
so
I mean,
she
that's
was a
pretty young.
minor. Yeah, I didn't even know who these people were, but she liked them because they came from families with a lot of money and all this, so it didn't matter, you know. In the
Mhm.
end, it's not really about Christ, it's about money in your pocket.
Okay.
Remember, the TLM and everything else is all a facade.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So it's all a facade, you know, and it's like, and I've talked with this with numerous other people, and they've come to the same conclusion too.
Yeah.
And they've come back to the church too because of it, you know. So,
Right.
um, but anyway, she one night she was going to let her go on this overnight. Said, "No, you're not." And I went to church, played the vigil mass on Saturday, came back, and my daughter was gone. And I said, "Give me the phone number, his phone number, so I can tell him to get him back, or tell me where they are." And she said, "I'm not telling you." And I
An
said, "I
overnight
want the
date.
information."
Weird.
We
God.
we were outside. She was barbecuing on the grill, and she was outside. She threw the barbecue sauce in my face.
Oh. Well.
Just
Okay.
try to stop me from protecting my daughter.
Well.
So then she was going to take the Pyrex thing and drive it in my face, and I blocked her from doing that, and it got out of there. I came back 2 hours later because people said if there's a heated thing, you should always just leave and cool off and come back. I come
Yeah.
back 2 hours later, and the cops were there to arrest me. The cops were there to arrest me. She said that I had hit her, which was a complete lie. So
Okay.
I sat in the clink for 3.5 days until she finally went in there and admitted that she lied.
Okay. Wow. So that's all on record
So they
too. Got all that.
that's all on record too. Was never convicted of it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
matter of fact, and I'll get to some of that a little later so just a little bit here, but so she back to when she left me, and so the SSPX priest told her to tell me that she was going to go to Walton, Kentucky, to put the kids in the school there and just go down there, and then you guys can get back together again. Well, I frankly didn't care where I lived, except I liked my job at the Lutheran Church, and I was doing some other really good work on the side too.
Yeah.
So
So you
I
had a
was
good
working for a
job.
pipe
You had a
organ
nice
company.
house
Yeah.
and all the
Yes.
stuff. And then so she leaves. You
And
tell her to
and
leave. And then
and
they're
I
like,
and I had and I had finally got a settlement for my sexual abuse from the archdiocese.
oh, okay. Okay.
Because they opened the window, the statute of limitations, they lifted those for a few years. Well, then I found out there were actually 3 other victims of this guy,
Okay. So your
but
wife
there was
didn't
only
believe
one
you
was alive
like at
too, since
first.
they
I
committed
thought,
suicide.
oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
Well, it wasn't that she at first she didn't believe me, but then she did believe me, and she said, "Well, you shouldn't have been there, or maybe you wanted it anyway." So
Wow.
or maybe you're just gay, and that's what people say. You're just gay, and you just you're just fighting it or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
It's unbelievable what they come up with, these people. And
Wow.
so anyway,
Okay. So you got your,
I
so you have this money, and then what?
hold on a second. Okay, there we go. So I got a settlement, which I can't disclose the amount that was part of the settlement, So I used that. We had a couple cars that we sold some money on, paid those off. Was getting ready to refinance the house, but I fixed up the house. It was kind of a process. It was an old house, beautiful house from 1909, and we were only the fourth owners of it. And so I gave her the beautiful house and anybody could ever ask for.
Man.
And so then it was right after that she left, and the priest told her to leave and to take that money, what was left of it, because I had no right to sue the Catholic Church.
Oh, but she had a right to take it and spend it herself.
That's correct. Or give it to them.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Remember,
Oh yeah.
give it to them. Okay, because they're just about money anyway.
Wow. Okay.
So
she goes to Kentucky?
So anyway, I ended up quitting my job, selling the house, moving down there, and got a job actually at a traditional parish in the diocese there.
Okay.
And which is like this diocese of traditional mass, and then SSPX. And I had gone a few times over to the SSPX. I'm like, this is just, I'm not getting involved with these people,
Yeah. It's just more of the same of what you'd already
But
experienced.
even that diocesan parish, they were all in cahoots with each other. And I started their music program there. I was there 18 months, and basically the SSPX priest talked that priest into getting rid of me.
Oh. Wow.
You see, we have to destroy Kurt no matter what, because he has a big mouth.
Oh.
And he's, showing what we really are, and we can't have that.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So, but in the meantime, that same priest told me to go down there. It was all a bag of tricks. It was a lie. It was to get me to sell the house, get me away from all my connections, which I'd had for many years, get down there where I knew nobody, and then of course, eventually got screwed. And then he told her, take the kids and go down to Phoenix.
Oh no. Wow. So you never actually got back together with her. It was like dangled in front of you.
It was all a trick. It was all lies. But see, when they lie, it's okay.
Oh, right. Because the ends justify the means.
The ends justify the means, exactly. Cool. So, I mean, if I had no faith at all by the time, I could have just walked away from everything at that point. But after that, there was a fraternity parish in Seattle that needed an organist, so I just went out there. I didn't know if I was going to stay there or not, but I had a sort of nondescript experience with them. Mm-hmm. The people were, like most trads, were very cliquey and kind of it's all about them. They're the superior kind of thing, but not as bad. It wasn't as bad. But it's expensive to live there, and I was renting a house with two other guys, and and it's just one of them ended up wanting out of the lease, and says I came back and I actually went to Virginia and worked for an organ company for a couple of years and played for a church part time. I did that, and then I'm where I'm at now, and
that's where you're at. Okay.
So yeah, it was interesting when I was in Washington. The priest at the time. Who's down there in Phoenix, called me up on the phone and basically accused me of being a loser and all kinds of things. And he said, you don't deserve to have her back. And you are a terrible husband and a terrible father because you're not with us and you don't abide by our, thinking, and called me a Protestant and everything else you can think of. And then this, by the way, and I'm going to say it on your show. This priest is the brother of the one that just got arrested about a month or so ago. Oh. This Matthew Staffke. It's his brother, who, by the way, also has credible allegations against him.
Okay.
And
isn't he in Australia now?
Moved him from Phoenix to St. Mary. He's in Australia because we don't. That's good to hide people there. They do that. They do it all the time. They always send people
Can
to
you explain
Australia.
that? Because I don't know if our viewers are going
So
to get that.
anyway,
It's
but he called me up on the
illegally
phone, like
extracted
just
to be
badgering.
punished. I'm sorry, Kurt. I just wondered if you could explain that.
Yeah, it's hard to extradite people from. Well, it's extradition. We don't have extradition with every country in the world, and that's an island off in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's hard to,
Right.
it's a good place to hide people.
Okay.
So when you're up to no good,
Okay.
and so, but the thing is that this Father Staffkey that was in Australia, he called me up on the phone saying, you don't have a right to your wife, you don't have a right to anything, you stole things. And I said, I did not. And he said, well, the police said you did it, you must have done it, and he said, and then you hit your wife. I said, I did not, and I was never convicted of that. And he said, well, you must have done something wrong or you wouldn't have been arrested.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because
the
justice system always works perfectly.
It always worked perfectly,
Nobody lies. Wow.
Nobody lies, and everything. And it just came down to, because I'm not one of them and I don't have money, so I'm the bad guy.
Wow. And he's pretty much just admitting that to you on the phone. I mean, he can't say that you weren't unfaithful to your wife, you weren't,
no.
like doing anything to your kids, like you were supporting them, you were there, all this stuff. Like, it's just, you're not one of them, so you're evil.
I'm not one of them and I don't have money. And so therefore they don't like me. It comes that they just don't like me, so therefore they can do whatever they want to me.
Wow.
That's really what it comes down to. And I was actually talking to one of my kids a while back, and I said, that because he accused me of not supporting my family. And I said, that I always worked in support of my family. She goes, yeah, Dad, I know that. She said, Mom, says, don't pay attention to her. She says all kinds of stuff, and this kind of thing. But, just the other thing is just like, not only from her, but from them too. It's just, when I realize it, it's just gaslighting, the years of gaslighting and narcissism.
Man, yeah. God, how damaging. And then your kids, I mean, so.
Well, okay, so nine kids. 9 kids.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest is 12. The oldest will be 33, I think. Yeah, and 34 actually should be. The only ones, there's 3 of them that still practice. The 12-year-old, but that's because he's 12 and still with Mom. Right. I have another one who's married and has 2 kids. I talk with her. She practices. They go to SSPX down there, but don't really fit in with that mentality. Okay. And they're open to other things. I'm not sure exactly everything they're doing right now. I have another daughter who's not married. She was going there, but I think she's going to a diocesan mass now. Okay. But that's it. The rest of them are basically pagans.
Oh man.
One daughter is bisexual now. Another one is non-binary.
Wow.
But do you think SSPX cares? No, because she's loyal to them.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, your family is a wreckage and they've lost.
That doesn't matter. Matter. She's loyal to them.
Wow.
I don't even know why she goes to. I don't even know why she goes to church. I don't even know why.
Right. Huh. Well, I guess people go for different reasons than, actually to worship God, maybe. Or
and actually, my son-in-law, by the way, my daughter and son-in-law were married validly because they had jurisdiction at that time down there. Yeah. Or I wouldn't have gone otherwise.
Oh golly.
Right. But he even says, he admits that they're different. They had problems, like they wanted to like suck all kinds of money out of them for the reception using the hall there. Everything is about money, literally. But yet their churches for the most part don't look that great. They never spend money on the liturgy. They have crappy organs. It's like, so if all of this stuff about the TLM and tradition and ceremony, and if all of this is important, why don't they spend any money on it?
Oh yeah. Well, It's
I
just
know
like
they're
Judas.
building that
I
big
mean, like
temple.
dipping into the purse, and then he's like, "Oh no, we shouldn't be, pouring out these rich oils on our Lord's feet." Like that could have been, money given to the poor. And it's like, yeah,
I put
you're
in I put in a
talking.
little pipe organ, and I put in a little pipe organ in St. Mary's when I was there. As soon as I left, they stopped using it and bought an electronic.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
weird. That's
and
weird.
I heard that they're getting one for their new ugly temple that they're building out there. Boy, is that thing ugly. Man, I
Oh,
would never
the
build
new
something like
Vatican
that.
or whatever they
Yeah,
call it. Oh,
yeah, it's a goofy looking thing. But
weird.
anyway, so yeah, they're getting something that's like, I think they're getting, I don't know if they're moving the one from the other. I forget. I read something about it. It's not very, I mean, this place is enormous, but they're putting something very truncated in there, you know. But well, that's because it's not important.
Yeah, well, I mean, it shows you don't need it explained because it doesn't make any sense according to the traditional lines when they're like, we're preserving tradition, we're doing everything the best of the best.
I remember back in the '90s, they bought a church, it was a closed church, I think a diocesan or something. It was a church they were buying. The society was,
Mhm.
and it had a pipe organ in it. And the superior at the time, Father Scott, was trying to get the price cheap and cheap. Well, finally, the diocese or whoever owned the building said, "All right, but then we're taking the pipe organ out because you keep bringing the price down, so we're going to take the organ out." And they said, "Okay, we don't need the organ anyway."
Oh, wow.
But these are the
Yeah.
people that care about the traditional liturgy.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I've heard that was it the chief financial officer for the society left about 10 years ago, left the society. He was a priest, and he
Right,
said at the time they were worth what, like 92 billion
right, exactly.
10 years
So
ago?
they don't need money from anybody.
Yeah.
So people that continue to
Get
give
it.
them money are just fools. I mean, they're just yeah.
Wow.
It's and all their spokesmen, the people that they're out there online here on YouTube, other places, just gaslighting everybody.
Yeah.
The gaslighting is I can't even listen to this stuff anymore. I just don't really look at much, and I'm very thankful to Reason and Theology and the Logos Project and various sites for exposing all of this fraud
Yeah. Right.
and caring about the faith and the law and and caring about the safety of children,
Hmm. Right.
because to these groups that doesn't matter.
Wow. Well,
I
souls
think when I was
matters.
in St. Mary's, it came out later that we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teachers that were gay.
Wow. So weird.
I never even had that many in any place that I ever worked in within the church, within the diocese. Never in any one location.
Wow. That's creepy. Wow. It's just so weird how they congregate there. It's like a good place for them to hide or something.
I guess, yeah. It's just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with all of that. I'm just done, done, done.
Right.
I'm
Right. Well, and you're finally in a place where you can just kind of heal. You're in a well, Novus Ordo community right now that you're playing
right.
for and
Very, yeah. It's very healthy and wonderful, and um, yeah, people want normal families. Yeah, it's but
right.
it's and we do have the TLM here in town because we have a college, a Catholic college, and they have it. But the priests that are saying it are fine. The bishop approves of it. And it's a whole different conversation. It's not
Mm-hmm.
turned into a cult. I don't go to it because I mean, I'm working at the parish on Sunday, so
Right.
it's the same time. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, it's a breath of fresh air. It's really
Wow.
wonderful,
Wow. Well, and
and I
it's
can
healthy and
have
it's showing like they say this can't happen in a Novus Ordo parish. What you're seeing, it's like it's bursting with young families and life, and it's has vitality and beautiful liturgies and all these things. It's like it's a total refuge, and yeah, they say it's not possible, but it is.
it's very possible. these are some of the most wonderful people I've ever met, and it's the delight and the joy, the happiness.
Yeah.
Is such a relief.
Wow.
And again, and in some of the arguments, they're still saying, well, you people say Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. It's like, we haven't been saying that for like, what, 12 years now?
Yeah.
They don't even know.
Oh, God.
There was just a recent article by an SSPX priest in my site who's totally gone over to the dark side. They used to print wonderful life articles and stuff for years,
Mhm.
and they threw all the victims of SSPX into the bus, and now they're using SSPX. Wrote this thing against the new rite of baptism, using the text, which hasn't been around for I don't know how long. The translation we have now is not the same as we had 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
So they're like, this is what happens when you sever, you lose sight, and you don't even know what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And you're not even giving the church credit for, correcting things or refining as she goes, which she has always done.
Nothing. Yeah, always done.
Always done.
You
Yeah.
know, and it takes sometimes decades for things to be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
The reforms of 1570 weren't implemented overnight. I mean, they didn't even reach France until Dom Guéroget
Wow.
in the 1880s.
Whoa.
They were still using, Gallican, rites that were not 200 years or more at the time, and stuff like that. And it was him and his monumental liturgical year and all that, from Solemns and restoration of the chant and all that. And how many years later was that? 300 years later.
Right. Yeah. Oh, what a good point. I love that.
Yeah, so I just started studying all this stuff, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. The narrative. Forget the narrative. Let's talk about the truth here.
Yeah. Right. Like you say, it's just gaslighting. And the more you look, the more you find that it's just these smoke screens in front of stuff to make it look complicated, but it's actually really very simple. And if you have to make the church into an enemy if you want to justify staying away from it.
Right.
But it's not justified because it's not true.
And they'll say like, well, they'll say that the Novus Ordo is Protestant, but I can name you two hands full of prayers that most Protestants would never accept in the Novus Ordo.
Right. Okay.
And then they just don't say anything when I say that. They just like kind of back off a little bit. And and they'll say, oh, but the Mass in 1570 is the same Mass as in the 3rd century. I'm like, no, it wasn't.
No way.
Ad Orientem and Versus Populum actually existed side by side, depending on what region you were in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, not to mention the language. Latin basically was gone by
that come through or not.
Or Latin came in at
Ad
like
Orientem
1,000 years in. It's like it was Greek.
And the language, there was no Latin. The Latin came.
Right. Yeah.
It was Greek and Aramaic,
Right.
And probably some Hebrew too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or even the thing about the posture to receive communion, it was standing in East and West, at least for the first 1,000 years of the church.
At least for the first 1,000 years.
And so now this idea that kneeling is more traditional, it's like, according to what? Like, that was a development. That wasn't original.
See, and it's funny because I really never had a problem with either one. With kneeling or standing, that was never an issue. And the way in the whole communion in the hand thing, they're like so over the top about all that, and that was something that was in the early church, and for whatever reason, the church stopped it for a long time. Of course, you know what they say stopped it. People didn't even go to communion for the most part.
That's a good point.
4,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what's one of the things that also, kind of started the Reformation is that people weren't going to communion except for the one time a year.
That's true. Yeah, we're used to the whole frequent communion push, but that's been a recent thing, like within this past century.
It was Pope St. Pius X.
Yeah. Right.
And even then, it's taken years, decades, for that to even, permeate.
Yeah, right.
Well, see, but that comes down to because, I've run into trads. They'll say, well, the Mass is just only a sacrifice. I'm like, no, it's sacrifice and supper.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, how can you read the New Testament?
They don't want to. They don't want to talk about the supper part. That's not to be talked about.
That is so weird. But the thing with that too is supper ties it into family. And if you're going to talk about family and how the church is a family and how gathering on Sundays is supposed to be this communal,
right,
family meal, well, guess what? Your schism becomes a lot more obvious in those terms because you're not doing that with the rest of the church.
They're not doing that with the rest of the church. So it's like, that's why it was interesting. One thing I found out in recent years it's always been like, if the church would say, if you don't commune and confess at least once a year in Easter time, then you're probably not really considered a Christian. Okay. There's something lacking there.
You're right.
Okay.
Right.
So it was interesting because at the Lutheran Reformation, Luther came out and said, if you don't commune at least 4 times a year, you're probably not a Christian.
Interesting.
He expanded it. Well, it was to try to change. Well, but it was trying to change the idea, obviously from a different angle, but to which, eventually the church did develop that mentality that more frequently was the way to go, because that's what the early church did.
Oh, right.
And I remember in the 70s when communion under two kinds came out.
Oh yeah, right. The
communion under 2 kinds came out. To drink from the cup.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was that did that rock?
The trads all went bonkers, and Michael Davies wrote a book against it, and all that stuff. And I'm like, now hold on a minute, Mom. Let's see here. Did Christ give the apostles only one or the other? Yeah. And it's like no, and the early church did do it. For some reason it scaled back, for various reasons. But it's not wrong. It's not a sin. Matter of fact, he said, "Take, eat, take, drink."
Yeah, right.
He didn't say just take, eat.
Right.
And so again, this was something that was a restoration, but for them was Protestant, because it was something that the Reformation, focused on.
Well, it's interesting how the Protestants preserved.
It's not something that wasn't Catholic.
Yeah, right. But the Protestants, because they maybe maintained some of these practices, and then they were brought in again to the liturgy after Vatican II, and they're being called Protestant. It's like they were Catholic first. That's why the Protestants had them. So they're ours. We're reclaiming them.
Right.
Yeah.
They're reclaiming them, exactly. And the same thing with singing, the same thing with congregational participation and singing and all that. I mean, frankly, I don't know. I mean, Luther got the church singing again, which I think is a wonderful thing. It's beautiful hymns and everything. And I don't know. It's funny because Catholics just don't kind of really like hymns. They're kind of weird about it. It's never completely, it's catching on again, but it's like, and don't do more than 1 or 2 verses, because, it might last too long.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, I mean,
and they don't realize it. Before the council, I had a priest friend of mine who was a Sulpician and taught music in the seminary for like 30 some years. And he died in 1992. And he was very traditional, and he would offer the indult mass to the diocese where he was retired. And he and I were very good friends, and he loved my musicianship and all of that. And he said, "Kurt, I gotta tell you something." He said, "I like the Latin Mass." He said it was beautiful. And he said, "But the Mass wasn't always like that." He said the Eucharistic prayer was not always like that until Gregory the Great added some things to it, And he said, "Does that make all those Catholics before bad?"
Yeah.
And he was like, I remember he was like, he said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "I was, ordained in 1931. And he said, especially in the Irish parishes, he said, the music was horrible, if they had any music at all. The priest would say Mass in between 10 and 20 minutes. They would just leave whatever out to get it over with."
Wow.
He said it wasn't this thing that everybody thinks that it was.
Right.
He said everything was learned by rote. People did not know scripture.
Ah,
They
right.
didn't really start, emphasizing scripture until the liturgical movement and preaching from the readings. He said we had a more limited lectionary, of course,
Right.
and he said, so it wasn't this thing that everybody thinks that it was.
Right.
He said it was
Right.
more by, so he really got me thinking, and like I said, that was in the late '80s and early '90s, and he really got me thinking, and it's like I was thankful for that because it never took me off into this extreme.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah, because now when people experience the TLM, as they call it, it's usually um, as a priest. I've had him on my channel. I'm going to have like part 2 with him on Tuesday, talking about the Roman Rite. But he's explained that it's like an atmosphere of artificial excellence that people experience the TLM in now, because those priests that offer it are like, they're very serious about it. They're dedicated. They're really like educated so that they do it right. And then people are drawn to it, and they bring all their gifts, and they like want to make everything beautiful and lush, and the music. And, so it's like, oh, wow, look at this. But it's just in pockets, like here and there, because he's like, sustain that universally. You can't. You're going to have mediocrity all over the place, because you have these harried priests trying to get from one mass to the next with all these things. And they're not all just nuts about the liturgy like these guys are that do it now.
Right.
And so he's like, that it was suffering worldwide. That's why the bishops all over the world were saying the first thing we need to talk about is reforming the mass. Like there
Right.
was a reason for that.
And that's why this priest told me this, also.
Yeah.
And he was like, he said it wasn't working anymore. He said it wasn't, he said the calendar, he said it needed reform. He said the office was, basically a disaster,
Mm-hmm.
and he said it was the priests doing their thing, the people doing their thing, and it wasn't a united, cohesive thing.
Yeah, right. We needed to
And
come together, and that happened after the reform. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's definitely
no,
more
it's not perfect, but
integrated.
it's no. And people say, well, you think it's all perfect now. You've sold out and
Oh,
you've, and all this kind of thing. And I'm like, just stop with the
oh
narrative. It's all another narrative,
no.
and on
Right.
and on and on. And oh, you're an ultramontanist. That's another one,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, nah, let's just stop, And it's like, but I'm very thankful for different people that I ran into that, showed me the whole history,
Mm.
not just 500 years or 100 years. That was another thing this priest told me. He says, and what is it with wearing Roman vestments and lace all the time? He said, I was ordained in 31 and we weren't wearing that stuff. We were
Oh.
wearing Gothic vestments. It was really the ethnic churches, like in the Polish churches, and the Slovak churches, and those kind of. He said those were the ones that were still using it, but a lot of it was because they were recent immigrants and they didn't have the money to
Oh.
replace that. So he said that stuff was already going out in the 1920s. But he said all these Latin mass people. He said it has to be lace albs, Roman vestments, and he said it's fanatical. He said he used to go on. This was like in the late '80s and early '90s. He was going on about this. There are beautiful Gothic vestments, And I have a picture of his first mass,
Yeah.
1931, and beautiful Gothic vestments, and
Yeah. Right.
linen elms and all of this stuff. And it's
Right.
like, no, you look at any trad site, it's Roman vestments and lace elms because it might not be valid if it's not that,
Oh no. Oh no.
might not be valid,
Yeah. Well, you go kind of nutty on the externals when that's basically a reason for being there. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what draws people in, and so then you're like, ooh, there's just so much focus on it. It's easy for the internal to be obscured, or what's behind the curtain kind of to really be acknowledged.
And try to foster external participation in any of those groups and see what kind of resistance you get.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, yeah, no. I get that. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're telling me it's a sin if I say ecum spiritutuo?
Yeah, no. My gosh. Like those parts were always the people's. It
They were
developed over
always
time that the servers ended up just saying them, but that was not actually the vision of the church ever. Like,
yeah.
no.
And like the offertory prayers and the elevations are like only 100 years before the Reformation.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. One thing I wanted to ask you about that you had said to me was really interesting. When you notice traditional priests from basically all the different groups that you've had experience with, and then you look at diocesan, just like Novus Ordo, Vatican II priests, as you call them.
Hmm.
When they learn to say the TLM, it's very different in character. Like
It's very different. Like
they they
our
don't get
priests,
weird. Is
our,
that's
where I was for 9 years, well, 7 years with a really good priest,
yeah.
and it was a totally different experience.
Oh, okay.
It was a different experience. We had the people sang the responses, they sang along with the ordinary. The sermons were based on the epistle and gospel, on the readings.
Hmm.
The We wore Gothic vestments, big mortal sin, you know. Um, we had the people weren't, fed this narrative, anti-church narrative.
Hmm.
Um, it was just completely different, and we had like 300 people on Sunday. But again, that was one of 5 masses on the weekend.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it was part of the whole parish. It wasn't a separate kind of thing,
Right.
and I would say a lot of people at some point made their rounds to that, and so it was just another mass of the parish that's approved by the church.
Right. Wow.
So, and I'm like, this is so much more healthier. This is so much more, you know. And
Right.
so if I would say there were any years that I really liked the TLM, it was those 7 years.
Okay. Right. But the context
Before,
is so different.
yeah, but it was totally different. And before and after, it's like I can't even go near it.
Mm, okay. Yeah,
I can't
that's
even
been what.
because it triggers my anxiety, and it becomes about being a show and about a specific narrative or narratives,
Right.
and in theatrical production and lace and fiddles, as I call it, and it's like I can't go there.
Yeah,
I
it's
just can't go
literally
there.
PTSD. I mean, I know other people that are like that too. I mean, they can sit through it, but it is not a happy thing. There's just so much,
And
baggage from those times. Yeah.
and in the when I discovered the scriptures, reading them is an everyday thing in Alexio Divina, and all of that opened up to me, and I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. And they were like, oh, well, that's sola scriptura. Then that's just all. We don't believe in sola scriptura, and so you really can't believe everything that's in there because it's mainly allegorical. This is from Trads, okay, because it's mainly allegorical, and
Wow.
yeah.
I've heard like modernist liberal priests say stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, but they're no better. The Trads are no better with that.
Well, they're the same. They're the same, but they don't want to admit it.
And it's funny because
Really.
they all they all like hail Cardinal Cajetan at the Diet of Worms in Augsburg. They wanted to get Luther to retract.
Uh-huh.
He himself did not really believe the Scripture was the Word of God,
Oh my
and you
God.
can find it online. He said that the books of Second and Third John, and Revelation, and Hebrews were not their authors. That they were not those authors.
Yeah.
He's like totally like slamming. I'm like, oh my gosh, and he's the one that was trying to get him to can. I'm like, good night,
Oh
you
no.
know. So there's been a scripture problem for a long time.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, it's always been a mess. It's just that we
It's always
forget.
been a mess. Yeah, we just forget, and then just like, so it's just like I went to a talk by a trad. This was 7 years ago, I think. He was going to talk about creation.
Mm.
He started the talk. He's the guy was a total narcissist. And he's got a glass of bourbon in front of him and a great big cigar and all this, and like I'm a real man and all this nonsense. And he's like, he starts the talk by dropping a Bible on the floor.
Oh,
And he
what?
said, and he pointed to it and he said, that book is not reliable.
Whoa, that's just so weird.
And he started tearing Genesis apart. You know, the whole evolution thing. Adam and Eve were mythological people. You know, we were were derivative of Neanderthals in the south of Africa.
Wow.
You
And
know,
this
which
guy's a threat?
actually Cardinal Pell believed the same thing. There's videos on YouTube where he admits all of that. So all the people think Cardinal Pell was so traditional. You know, it's another. But anyway, they
Weird.
just like him because he supported the TLM. It doesn't matter what else he believed. You know.
Oh.
So, but so it's like, oh, it was going on. The crossing of the Red Sea was a low tide. The Jonah in the mouth of the big fish was fictation. Was a fiction. This was a trad guy giving the talk.
Wow. Wow. In a parish setting?
It was in an SSPX setting.
Oh. Wow. Okay. Well, golly, you just never know what you're gonna get.
No, you don't know what you can. And all these men, it was mostly men there, and they're like just drinking all this up, and I'm like, you know, get me the heck out of here, ASAP.
I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. No,
Not
no.
drinking the Kool-Aid, you know.
What
So I'm just
advice
like,
would you give to someone who's like kind of finding out about traditionalism and they're intrigued and like, you know, or maybe they've gotten to some TLMs and they're like, oh wow, this seems so much cooler than what I had. Like, what would you say to somebody like that who's kind of looking and wondering if it's all the way it looks? And I mean, what would you say?
yeah, it's nothing. I mean, yeah, it's I can't in conscience promote it.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's interesting because my dad will say to me, he said, I'm glad you got out of that, because he said you were just a mess. You were a mess for years. And my dad goes to mass 7 days a week and daily rosary and all of that. He's going to be 90 next month, you know. And it's just like, I'm just glad you're away from it. He said, you are so much more at ease and calm.
Man. Yeah, well, I mean, you were in such turmoil, living in an invalid marriage that couldn't be resolved, and
It couldn't be resolved.
all this stuff.
You know, and it's funny because I applied for, after the divorce was final, I applied for annulment, which I got in 41 days because of lack of form. And then she says, well, I don't accept that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And the SSPX is like, no, we don't accept that. And I'm like, I don't care what you think. It's what the church says. And I'm like, and they're like, well, I said, well, you're the ones that told her to divorce me. So why do you even care?
So they told her to get a divorce.
Oh yeah, they do that.
But then she won't accept the annulment.
I have talked to numerous people where they have, if they don't like one of the spouses, they'll tell the other one that they do like to get a divorce. It goes on all the time. They are no more pro-marriage than the man in the moon. You know, they are, yeah. And they're like, oh no, she can divorce you, but you can't get an annulment. You need to. I said, you're just trying to entrap me. And they're like, well, no, you don't have a right to get married again. You're stuck now.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, but I mean, they have their own marriage tribunal and stuff, so they set themselves above the tribunal.
Sure,
So yeah,
they do.
Just think they can do that. Okay. Wow. Well,
and you know, they never told us anything about jurisdiction back then. That was in 1990. Now, a few years later, they started making people sign papers, which of course doesn't mean anything anyway, saying that they recognize the supply jurisdiction and all that, you know. But I think that was like 1994 or something. They started that. I never signed anything. We never signed it. Matter of fact, the pre-Cana stuff, or whatever you want to call it, beforehand was like the worst you can imagine. There were supposed to be 6 sessions, and I think we only ended up doing 2 because priest gets canceling. And then the 2 that we had, I don't even remember what they said.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wow. Well, I'm also curious, just before we kind of wrap up, I wanted to ask you,
anything's fine,
to your experiences, and what kind of like words of counsel or encouragement could you give to other like sex abuse survivors who might see this and be relating to your story or looking for some?
I would say get away from them as quickly as possible. Find a really good counselor. I mean, not every counselor is good for every single person. You have to find the right one. I did. Took a little bit, but I did. Hold them accountable.
Okay.
Warn other people. Do not keep your mouth shut.
Okay.
Get justice where you can. And use things like Lectio Divina and stuff as part of your healing. Use God's word as your healing, because it's all there, everything. It's wonderful what's there, and it's so therapeutic and healing in and of itself,
Yeah.
I don't find it beneficial just to sit there and rattle off a bunch of prayers, out of a manual that doesn't really do anything for me.
Right.
I want to read what God talking to me,
Right.
and it's really a wonderful, comforting thing. There's I remember because I used to go through this where they think, oh well, you have to say the rosary every day or you're going to hell.
Oh.
We didn't even have the rosary for the whole history of the church. And by the way, I found out it was just accepted as an approved devotion in 1570.
Oh wow. It's still kind of new.
Yeah, still kind of new. Yeah. I mean, it existed before that, but not exactly in its current form. I mean, even the Hail Mary didn't have the second part originally, so it was and I'm not saying it shouldn't, I'm just saying it didn't have it at that time. The thing is that there are other ways to God through prayer. Lectio Divina works for me. I love the Rule of St. Benedict.
Right.
That's pretty old,
Yeah, right.
That's pretty old, and I find it very, very, very good for for family life.
Yeah. Right. No.
Very, very good for family life, And but this whole thing, it's a contest. How many litanies can I do? How many prayers can I rattle off?
Right.
No,
No, I've heard that
it just
from a
doesn't. I'm
friend of
not
mine.
criticizing anybody. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
It
No, but I
doesn't
know
work.
that's a mentality. It's not just your experience. I've run into that too. And someone said to me the other day, they were guiltily confessing that they didn't always get a rosary in every day and they felt so bad about it. And I was like, it's not a sin to miss your rosary. It's a really great thing to pray rosary every day. But it's there's no 11th commandment that says thou shalt pray rosary daily.
I'm working. I'm working
It's okay.
anywhere between, with traveling and everything, anywhere from 10 to 12 to 13 hours a day. It just doesn't always work. Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't always work,
Right.
And for me to come home and do Lectio Divina or read part of the rule or something, it's just much more, and I get a lot more out of it.
Well,
and then they'll say, what do you mean? Don't you use the Douay Rheims Bible? I'm like, the Douay Rheims only mentality,
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, no, there's more other translations that are approved by the church. And so, and they're like, oh, it's Douay Rheims only. I'm like, well, you people don't even read it anyway, so who cares? It's like, yeah, it's a crazy, it's crazy. So it's like, I'm a lot happier.
Oh, I'm really glad that you found somewhere you can finally start kind of putting yourself back together and letting God put you back together, and just for being willing to share your story too, because it requires courage to do that, and generosity. You're putting yourself out there.
Sure. I mean, there's some other things that are developing too that I'm not going to go on about right now because they're developing, but it's all good.
Okay.
And I'm in the latter part of my life now, and so we never know, and it's
right.
I am very thankful to Almighty God for bringing me to where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Well, you give people reason to hope. I mean,
yeah, and never give up the hope. Never give up the hope.
Right.
Forget the narratives and never give up the hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kurt. I don't know if there's any other stories or things you'd like to add in before we close, but you're certainly welcome if there's something missed?
Well, something that I think I said early on, that I just find it, I just found really big issues with the whole trad thing, other than maybe in the diocesan realm.
Mm-hmm.
But like with the three groups and all that, I'm like, no, no.
The three groups, you mean the Institute, the fraternity, and the SSPX?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, even the approved one, it's like, yeah, no. It's it's still a very segregated kind of thing,
Yeah.
and the cliques. Oh, the cliques, unbelievable. The cliques, and and the narcissism, and if you don't fit into one of the cliques, and I never really fit into any of the cliques, really. Um,
Yeah. I think a
because
lot of
thing,
people wouldn't. I mean, yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, if you have money, you fit into a lot of the cliques, and if you like have a good job and you have a nice house and all of this kind of thing, and they'll pay attention to you. Otherwise, you're nothing. You're really a nothing. It's a very
Right.
segregated kind of thing. It's
Right.
really not. I never found it to be that unifying as people claim.
Yeah. No, I've found it to be way more divisive than unifying ultimately. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just creating a faction and like camps. And instead of fostering unity, it's not really doing that. So in our own parish, we had the EF TLM celebrated for a few years, like every Sunday, and this community kind of grew up around it. And a bunch of people left the SSPX chapel to come over and were regularly attending. But then after Traditionis Custodes came out and the Dubia, the response to the Dubia, and our bishop was like, oh, he felt like in good conscience he couldn't continue permitting it, because he's like, really, the spirit
hmm
of what the Holy Father is asking is that we focus our energies on the Novus Ordo and unifying, and
right,
he just couldn't see how to reconcile it. We have such a shortage of priests too. He's like, and they're not supposed to binate, do both forms in one day.
in
And so
one day,
all
right,
that, he was just like, oh, okay. So he said, I'm not, like we were doing this whole sanctuary restoration, putting in a communion rail and things. And he's like, I want you to go ahead with that. I'm going to have you say the Latin Novus Ordo, Ad Orientem,
right,
give communion at the rail, all this stuff, like do that. Because he didn't want to take something away, but he just felt like that's what he had to do to really be obedient. And what's
right.
interesting is our different mass going, like communities within the same parish were very, I would say, kind of isolated at that time. Like they really just moved within their own circle. After that change happened, I mean, pretty much everybody stayed, which was amazing. Like some of them had a really hard time getting used to it being the Novus Ordo, but it was interesting, like how gently they tried to handle it. Our pastor was really good and tried to explain everything as he went, and he retained, like they even did the last gospel and the prayers after low mass and stuff after mass was over.
Yeah, after
He's
mass,
like,
sure.
we can still do that. Even the prayers
Yeah,
at the
you
foot
can
of
do
the
that.
altar happen
Sure,
outside of mass, so he's
sure,
been
sure.
doing those too for the first year before he officially starts mass, so there's no confusion, like he's sticking it in there. But it just retained enough continuity, people were able to kind of adjust, and then
That's
it's
fine.
like we started working together. Like our fellowship improved, like between
I
the
believe
mass
that.
times, and it's like the choirs were working together, and we were like sharing these common experiences, or like Holy Week liturgies. They were all Novus Ordo. For some of these people, it was the first time they'd ever been to Holy Week liturgies, Novus
Right.
Ordo. And so they were like, oh wow, this is really something. But they were like really good about it, and it ultimately it's really helped us bond as a parish. It's been very positive. I don't see that would have necessarily happened if it hadn't been for the transition. And I know
No,
that
I
that
don't
was
think so.
was
And,
hurtful to people, but they survived it. And I think
and
we're getting stronger as a result. It's like, well, you just don't know what can happen unless you have faith and you obey.
tradiciones, tradiciones. Okay, I understand this Pope is not really into the TLM. Okay, I understand that, but the trads have only one person to thank for tradiciones, themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are the ones that push this to the head. I'm convinced of it anyway,
Mm.
because of all the narratives, of the divisions, of
Yeah.
the rhetoric.
Yeah.
It was becoming, they did it to themselves.
Yeah.
Instead
Right.
of like Benedict gave it, just go along and accept it and have it where you're going to have it and be thankful. No, they kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing all these narratives. And I think this Pope just was like, I'm done with that.
Well, his job is to preserve unity in the church.
Yeah, right,
Father, and
exactly. And
that's
it's
so
just
he
like,
has to do what he
and
can to do
what are
that.
they doing now? They're doing it even more than ever. All these blogs and everything, and
Right.
these books and everything. It's like they're like. I mean, I was reading one a couple weeks ago where they're just gaslighting people out of the church.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of inaccurate stuff in those books that people are just gobbling up and assuming it's all true. And it's like, because who has time to go do all their own scholarship? But at the same time, you got to be careful who you choose to trust because not everybody's equally trustworthy. And there's a lot
Yeah,
of agendas. Not everyone has them, but obviously we're seeing that that's a thing. And
we're
you're not
seeing that.
speaking. I'm seeing some things in the chat about like you maybe are speaking from your PTSD and your own pain and like projecting it onto other people. So,
That's an easy I'm used to hearing that. That's an
yeah.
easy slap back, and
Yeah.
it's not correct and it's not fair.
Mhm. Well, one thing too is you're not speaking just from your own experience. You've had many
No.
people come to you
Oh,
sharing like exactly the
yes.
same thing. It's like you have seen this over and over and over and over. You've been in communities all over the states, different, trad organizations, and you're like, there's the common threads that run through everything, and they do it like not every single individual. You're not saying they're all like that, but yeah,
No, they're
you're
not all like that.
representing a whole bunch of people who have not yet made their voices heard sufficiently to get people to wake up to how this really is in a lot of places, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But I've actually had more abuse by trads than I have even people in parishes.
Okay.
Mental and mental abuse and verbal abuse, spiritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have actually seen more sexual abuse. When you look at the size of the traditional movement and the
Yeah.
amount of cases of sexual abuse, and of course all the cases we don't know about either, it's
Right.
pretty big. It's pretty big.
Yeah. Definitely
But
more
because they have the
information.
TLM, it can just be overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
Have
Yeah.
mercy, Lord, have mercy.
Yeah. Right.
Lord, have mercy. My heart goes out to the victims, to the children.
Yeah. Well, so often thrown under the bus, and you've
Oh,
experienced that, and you've heard from lots of
yeah,
people who have even been treated worse. But yeah, it's like
right.
you don't come out about abuse because you want to be popular. I mean, you lose your family, your friends, your community so often, your reputation because they turn it back on you. I have heard
Here,
this over and over and over.
so here's something I'm doing some research on and coming across it being true, is that the attrition rate within SSPX and other groups of Catholics, children, once they reach the age of 18, is like 80%.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that too, actually. Mm-hmm.
So, and the places where I'm checking this out, it's proving to be true.
Mm-hmm.
But they won't talk about it because they're getting their money.
Hmm. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, if it were about the faith, that would be a big problem for them. They would be addressing.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that should be it should be a big problem because but they don't
Right.
care. They just don't care, and I feel sorry for those kids. I really do. My heart goes out to them.
Yeah, right. No, I'm actually having a young guy on next week to talk about his story growing up trad. He wasn't raised in the SSPX, but he did attend a school in St. Mary's for a few years because his parents
Ugh,
just felt like they couldn't. I know. So it's going to be really interesting. And then he married his wife who was SSPX, and they prepared through St. Mary's. They had permission from the bishop so it was a valid marriage. But
right.
he's just like, oh, I have some unbelievable stories to share about our marriage prep and what they were teaching us and stuff. But it's like, he's moved through different traditionalist groups too, and he's just like, this is not it. And he's seeing that most of the people in his generation who were raised like that are becoming very disillusioned with it, and most of them leave. And some of them do go to the Novus Ordo, but a lot of them just totally leave the church. I mean, that
They
is
just leave the
more
church.
common. But yeah, but
Yeah,
they've been told that there's nowhere else to go, and that traditionalism is the only right way. And if you can't handle it, then they just jump ship, and you kind of can't blame them, especially if they've been victims of abuse, because it's like they're totally shattered.
Right.
There's no point. There's no refuge for them.
Right. There isn't a refuge for them. There really isn't. And so I am also very, very understanding even when they leave the church.
Right. Yeah.
And
Right.
I know they'll say this is not a valid argument. I know I'll get eggs thrown at me for this one, but I've seen them where they have left and gone into a different, community, denomination, whatever you want to call it, and they've actually flourished and were able to heal from what they went through. I can't just ignore that.
Yeah. Right.
I'm
Right.
much more understanding and sympathetic.
Right. Well, that's awesome. And so, yeah, I don't know if you'd be willing, if anyone contacts me after watching this interview, and, to be in touch with you, to be able to kind of unpack things, or just talk to someone else who's been through
They
it.
can. I do a lot of victim advocacy work
Okay.
on the side. I've been doing that for actually a number of years now.
Okay.
And I was, trained by my therapist, and he,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah,
Okay,
I'm
awesome.
certainly willing to, yeah.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
they can certainly reach out. I'm always there for those in need.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kurt. And I really
You're
appreciate your
welcome. You're
time
welcome, Laura.
and sharing all this, because it's something that people need to hear. And yeah, it's not everyone's experience, but it's legitimate. And it's something that we need to know more about, because we need to take care of each other better than we have.
We do. We really do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we'll have you on again another time, and maybe we'll have something happier to talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about.
Yeah.
We can talk about church music and pipe organs. That's my.
Oh
big
yeah,
thing,
church
so.
music. I love sacred music and
Yeah.
church history, because you're really going to school on that, and it's just something we always need to know more about. So that'd be
Right.
awesome. All right.
We just finished installing a very big pipe organ out in Ohio last week. So yeah, so it's my
awesome.
life. It's my life. It's wonderful.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Well, God bless you, Kurt, and we'll be praying for you. And thank you again so much. So,
Okay. Thank you. Okay. God bless. Bye.
Thanks.